Welcome to GED Mastery. Let's talk about quadratics. So what is a quadratic? Well, if you have an equation with an x squared, you're looking at a quadratic, and the graph of a quadratic can look either like an upside down U or a right side up U. Now let's talk about the solutions of a quadratic on a graph. It's going to be where that parabola, that's what that shape is called, crosses the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis. So let's look at this parabola. It crosses it here and here. So those points would be where x equals 0 and where x equals -4. So those would be the two solutions to this quadratic. And sometimes you'll also see the maximum or the minimum. So you'll have a maximum if it's upside down. The maximum point is right here, and that's going to be where x is -2. And if you draw a line through that maximum point, well, let's just pretend that's a straight line, that would be the line of symmetry, because if you fold that parabola over that line of symmetry, the two sides will match up perfectly. Let's talk about 3 different ways we can solve a quadratic if we're given an equation. So if you have an equation and you also have a bunch of multiple choice answer options, one of the ways you could solve it is by plugging in those answer choices. So let's start with answer choice A and plug in -2 first and see what happens. So anytime there's an x, we're going to put in -2, and if you want to just write that down before you do it, it might make it a little bit easier to enter into the calculator. Okay, let's plug that in and see what happens. So we've got 2 parentheses negative. That little negative is in parentheses there. Make sure you don't hit the minus sign. And then square, this little x squared button here, plus 3 parentheses -2 minus 14. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, so it gives us -12. So in essence, that would be saying that -12 is equal to 0. Because that whole thing is equal to 0. That's not true. So A cannot be our answer. Let's go down and try 2 in B and see what that gives us. So we'll enter the whole thing again, but instead of -2, we'll put +2. So 2 times 2 squared plus 3 times 2 minus 14. Let's see what that gives us. And it gives us 0. And so when we plug this part in and we get 0, it would make a number sentence that says 0 is equal to 0, which is a true number statement. So we know that 2 is one of our answers. So actually B, C, and D all have 2 as a choice. So let's enter in the second part of B and see if that's true. If not, we could move down to C and D and plug in those answers. So let's enter -7/2. I'm going to press this little fraction button. There we go. -7/2. Press down to get down in there. Then I'm going to press the right arrow to get out of that fraction. Close the parentheses, square it, plus 3 parentheses. I've got to press that fraction button again. -7/2. Right arrow, close the parentheses, minus 14. And it's giving us 0 again. So since both of those give me a true number sentence, B is going to be my correct answer. Another option is to factor the quadratic. You want to do this if you don't have any answer choices, or if you're pretty good at factoring. So when you're looking at how to factor, you want to look at the last term first, and that includes the sign to the left of it. And we want to go ahead and list all of the numbers that can multiply together to make that number. So to make -36, I could do 36 times -1. I could do -36 times 1. I could do 9 times -4. I could do -9 times 4. I could do 3 times -12, or -3 times 12. All right, we've now got to look at this middle term and see which of the factors add up to make -5. So it's definitely not this, it's definitely not this. I think probably between the 9 and 4 we've got our answer, but which one adds up to make -5? Well, 9 plus -4 is +5, so that's not it. It's going to be -9 and +4. So then I set up my problem like this. And I'll put in my factors right here, -9 and 4. And now there's one more step, because I've had my factors, but I don't have my solutions. Since both of these multiplied together equal 0, each one of them could equal 0. So I'm going to just take it apart and set each one equal to 0 and then solve. So I've got two little algebra problems now. To get the x alone, I'll add 9 to both sides. This 9 cancels out, so I've got x equals 9. That's one of my solutions. I'll subtract 4 from each side to get the x alone here. Carry down my x equals -4. So those are my two answers, 9 and -4. So my third option would be to use the quadratic formula. And look at how complicated it is. This comes from the GED formula sheet that you get on the test. So it's not like you have to memorize it, but with these signs and squaring something that could be negative, there's just a lot of opportunities to make a tiny mistake entering it on the calculator. So that's why I kind of like to stay away from this. But if I'm trying to factor it and I'm taking too long, I'll just go ahead and use the quadratic formula at that point. So we need this to be equal to 0, so we've got to get rid of this 4 first. So let's subtract 4 from both sides to keep it equal. Just copy everything down. 3x squared plus 5x minus 8 equals 0. And now we have our a, b, and c that we can go ahead and plug in to the formula there. A, b, and c. And it includes the negative here. Negative b, so that would be -5, plus or minus. So you'd have to go ahead and do the whole thing with plus on the calculator and then go back and do it again with minus on the calculator. Times the square root of b squared, so 5 squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. Let's enter it into the calculator and let's do it with the plus sign first. So -5, and I'm going to put the whole thing in a fraction, -5 plus the square root. See how that's the little neon square root there? So I have to click that neon button first to get that square root. Now I've got it, 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times -8, and the negative, remember, is this little button down here. And that's all over 2 times 3. Let's hit enter. Okay, so my first solution is 1. And now let's go back and put the -1 in there for our second solution. And instead of entering this all into the calculator again, I can just hit the up button until I get that part of the formula that I put in. Let's hit enter, and then we can edit it before we hit enter again to solve. So we want to change that plus to a minus. So let's get up into the numerator and just get over there to the plus sign. Okay, and instead of plus, I'm going to put minus this time. There we go, hit enter. So my other solution is x equals -8/3. Thanks for watching. You've got this.